Anyways, so our last speaker is Greg Gordon from SSRN, and a big thanks to him for stepping into the breach since Robert Harrington couldn't make it.
Thanks, Tom. So we're sitting there last night at a bar, and Tom Reller says to me, "Hey, do you want to give a talk tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure. What can I talk about?" And he said, open access. I said, "Okay, I know a little bit about that." Sustainable models. I said, "Okay, I know a little bit about that." And he said, "Great, you're in." And then he told me it was 8:30 this morning, which clearly was a whole nother level of commitment that I wasn't prepared to make. But I did come to understand, I don't normally hang out at SSP, but I did come to understand that SSP, everything happens at the bar, so at least that was a good lesson to learn to begin with. So we said, what really should I talk about, since we hang out in the social sciences? And they said, well, actually read the description, and social sciences is kind of an area that people want to learn more about, so talk about that. And we actually bought you, so maybe you could talk about kind of your secrets of success and talk about what it was like to create a sustainable open access repository and what it took about doing that. And then Michelle said, and you get free registration. I said, awesome. So I get to be a speaker and I get to get money back. She said, no, you don't really get money back. But if you hadn't paid yet, we would give you free registration. I said, this is how publishing works these days. So what I want to talk about is kind of funny how we were talking about pricing on a whole nother level. So I will greatly apologize for the fact that I had a very short period of time to prep for this, and this is annoying as hell from a technical standpoint, but let's see if I can throw some ideas out there to at least get a conversation started. So if I think about what it takes from an SSRN standpoint to be successful, there's two rules. So what I want to talk about then is that first, obviously don't tell everything I know, but the two things I will tell you are that don't say yes to late night commitments to speak. And even more importantly is when somebody says there's a really cool cocktail bar around the corner, probably that's not the night before you want to be presenting. So let me tell you a little bit about SSRN, because I don't know that everybody understands it. So here's kind of the basics for what we do. But as was talked about, we are a preprint repository. We're the largest repository for social science and humanities research in the world. We don't do any peer review, but we do have 3 stages of review. As Louise was talking about, in a preprint world, more is not better. More generally means more stuff, but more junk, not of any real value. So in SSRN land, what happens is that somebody submits something. We have a team of staff that have been around for a long time. They review it for completeness. Is it the right PDF? Is it in the scholarly discourse? Those kind of basic things. And then we have what we call stage 2. And stage 2 is classification. And we have 38 right now classifiers. So these are PhD candidates, early stage professors who look at everything that comes into SSRN and find a home for it. So we cover about 30 different disciplines. We have about 3,000 places to be categorized across 1,000 e-journals in those 30 different disciplines. So we have networks in accounting and finance and economics, but we also have sustainability and corporate governance and entrepreneurship, music, research, and composition. And those papers get classified into those little buckets on a very granular level. So it's a little bit different for us than probably is for most of you, is that we allow classification into a dozen different areas. So the accountant who writes about Sarbanes-Oxley can put it into an accounting journal. They can also put it into a corporate governance e-journal or into a regulatory economics or securities law e-journal. So we all talk about interdisciplinary research, but we really want to think about a little bit more of a shift as interdisciplinary perspectives. So that we show the accountant what the economist is thinking. We show the legal scholar what the economist is thinking. And this cross-pollination of perspectives we think adds to the conversation. And at the end of the day, SSRN's trying to just level the playing field. It's not where you are or what discipline you're writing in, but how do you start to share ideas? So SSRN's a lot about sharing. And I'll talk more about this theme of sharing in open access across a whole bunch of different perspectives. Now, speaking of sharing, this is actually a photo that I stole from John Wilbanks a while ago, and it's kind of a great point to share my definition, my very, very simple definition of innovation. And so my definition of innovation is to create new things by being exposed to a broader and deeper set of existing things. And that's what SSRN's really trying to be, is the broadest, deepest set of existing things in the disciplines that we cover. And not in a siloed fashion, but very, very flat. And we try to do things that allow this sharing across different perspectives, across different subject areas, across different disciplines, to help researchers create cool, new, innovative research faster. Because you have to have data. We have about 300,000 authors, continuing to grow about 2,300 each month through last year. They come from all over the world, and you have to have a Wordle, because it's quite possibly the worst way to represent data known to mankind. And in this particular one, Canada is well represented, and then I realized that probably there's not a lot of Canadians actually here in the room, but still, I am in Canada, so I have to share. We have about 600,000 submissions in the SSRN library. We do have some relationships with publishers who provide published content, either in an open access or on a pay-per-view basis, but the vast, vast majority are submissions from individual authors, from schools and research institutions, and from conferences. We have a conference system that we don't have time to talk about today, but basically where you can do blind, double-blind, peer-reviewed reviews within this own bucket of our world. So we have a lot of content. And again, this concept of letting 1,000 flowers bloom is very, very important to us. We think it's really great when somebody at a community college gets cited. It's not just about whether I'm at Harvard or Stanford or wherever I am. The small scholar, the unknown scholar, the independent scholar can actually be part of this discourse. We think that's very, very important. Now, unfortunately, when you have 1,000 flowers bloom, you also wind up with a few weeds. So, on the left and the right are two actual submissions into SSRN. Now, in SSRN, you basically come to a form, you put in metadata, and that metadata helps figure out where it goes, and we classify it, and then you upload a PDF of the paper. Now, we've been around for 20 plus years, so we actually didn't initially figure out that a PDF of a paper could actually be a camera phone picture of your paper, and then submit it. So it creates a little bit of an OCR problem for us, but it does give us one thing that we're very, very proud of. It allows me to stand up here and say that the SSRN library includes everything in the social sciences and humanities, including the kitchen sink. And that's a very unique aspect for us. Now, as I said a moment ago, we've been around for 20 years. So the next slides I try to have very few words on my slides, but the next slides are a bit meaty, and I'll try to just highlight some of the aspects of them because it's, with the flickering, a little bit too hard to read. So we've been around for 20 plus years, and you can see along the bottom half of that, where we started off in '95 with accounting, economics, and finance, and then law and management, the growth of disciplines over the last 20 plus years. And then as you can see across the top, we actually started with the concept in 1994 and then started some subscriptions and moving forward. And important point was in 2004. We realized that for preprints, for working papers to be part of the conversation, they needed to be in the conversation. They needed to be citable. So I worked with Amy Brand when she was at Crossref, and we became the first repository issued an ISSN. Because at the Crossref meetings, they would say, oh, just get an ISSN. How hard could that be? Just, everybody can get one. Well, actually, it's really, really hard. In fact, not only can you not get one from the Library of Congress, but you actually have to petition the ISSN body in Paris to allow you to get an ISSN when you are a repository. Now, it's gotten a little bit better in the last dozen years or so, but we started issuing DOIs for preprint content back in 2004, and that allowed those papers to be part of the conversation. Now, John said a moment ago that 60% of the papers in bioRxiv are actually published, and that's a great statistic. We're very proud of the fact that actually in SSRN, we look at it differently. We don't look at the number of preprint or open access papers in SSRN that have been published, because we think that in some cases a preprint is the last time that something needs to be published. It actually is the citable document. Now, we fully support and have great relationships with thousands of publishers, but we think that there's a broader spreading of this idea. We think that the idea is that you want to have a paper to be published, and so when we look at like the Journal of Financial Economics, 99% of the papers that were published in 2014 were available in SSRN on average 13 and a half months in advance. So those are the metrics that we're looking at. What papers should be published should be published. What papers shouldn't be published shouldn't be published. What papers are just kind of this fodder in the conversation should be fodder in the conversation. And in some cases, it just needs to be a preprint. It doesn't need to be published. And so this broadening of what is content that a few of the other speakers have talked about, we think is very, very important. And we fully support it and have for a very long time. Now, people always ask, how the hell do you make money? How are you actually sustainable for the last 20 plus years? So we created, before we actually knew that there was a term freemium, a freemium model. And I won't go into what freemium is because I'm sure everybody understands that. But one aspect here, and there's the services we provide on the right and kind of a quick walkthrough on the left, but we actually didn't start out on this pathway. And so when I think about sustainability and open access, I don't think about, oh my God, this is the answer, right? As Roy just talked about, there's pricing and there's services and there's a whole bunch of other things you need to be thinking about. So you need to be very flexible in your model because there is no answer. And to steal the startup concept, you need to be able to pivot from one idea to another so that you actually have the flexibility and the ability to change, sometimes rather quickly. So our original model was to build a database, get to critical mass, and then sell access to this A&I database in the social sciences, which EconLit at the time was the only other offering, and it was on a CD. So we were all set. We had the whole model built. We had pricing. We had everything was really, really cool. And I was at Georgia State University giving a workshop on using SSRN. And to tell at what point in time this was, my pager goes off. So I look at my pager, it says call the office immediately. I call the office, and the London Times went from a free to a subscription model. And in 30 hours, they lost 82% of their subscribers. So we quickly pivoted and said, okay, this is not going to work for us, and decided to actually wrap premium services around our core services. And our core services are your ability to submit for free and download for free. So as we've started to evolve, we have this conversation, and we had this long analysis inside the company about what is open access and how did things start to happen and how did we get to where we are. And again, we don't have time to kind of debate that. I'm happy to go into it a little bit more during the Q&A if helpful. But what we realized was that, in the mid-'80s, you kind of had this failure of trust with a lot of publishers. And we can get into the reasons and all those other kind of things, but you had this immediate, almost visceral reaction. And it was this rise of open access, this evangelical approach to open access. And so we stepped back and we said, well, how does that fit into the grand scheme of things, right? Because open access and sustainable open access is cool and wonderful. But when we start to think about things, we wanted to think about how does it fit into the grand scheme of things. So we started to look at, historically. So you had back in the 80s, digitization, and digitization was going to change publishing and make everything free and publishers out of business, and everything was just going to be wild and awesome. It didn't quite happen that way. And then you had open access, and open access we think is very, very important, but very important from not necessarily putting somebody out of business, but really important from a sharing concept. How do we help researchers create cool, new, innovative research faster? That's how we look at open access. And so we're starting to see this evolution. And so what we start to see here is this kind of the individual being more in control of their content. And I refer to it somewhat crudely as the YouTubification of scholarly research. Much broader creation, global dissemination, and simpler and easier access. More sharing across all spectrums. So this YouTubification of research is creating a whole greater need for a lot more outlets. So as part of a conference workshop at Columbia University about 10 months ago now, and the entire workshop was on DIY publishing. And how do I as the researcher take a more active role in my research? How as I as the researcher take a more active role in pushing my thoughts forward? And the one thing that came out of the conversation afterwards with the scholars was they need more outlets. And not that they don't need more prestige journals, because those exist, and that's wonderful. And not that they don't need more repositories, but they almost need more granular outlets. And I think, as Luis also talked about, that metrics will help that happen. So when we start to think about things, we start to think about the future and is it an opportunity or is it a graveyard? What does the future look like? And I wrote a paper a couple of years ago, actually several years ago now, for Against the Grain, and it's on SSRN, you can download it. And it talks about a whole bunch of things, but it talks about a basic core difference between STM and SSNH. And when I talk to my mom and I try to explain to her what I do, I just go to this really simple analogy. And I say, Mom, we share papers in SSNH. She says, what the hell is SSNH? And I said, well, it's different than STM. She says, what the hell is STM? And I said, okay. So think about research being divided into two groups. And in the STM group, you've got a rifle and a single bullet. And I'm trying to find the cause of this or the cure for that. And that's that single bullet. And on the SSNH side, I've got a shotgun. And I have a shotgun blast of pellets. And I'm looking at the spray. I'm observing the spray. I'm trying to learn what I can from that. So 100 people walk in the room, and 50 go right, and 20 go left, and 30 stop in the middle. That's SSNH. That's an observational kind of a thing. And the other thing that makes a difference is that in the STM world, there's a lot more money chasing research. There's a lot more money chasing labs and funding research. And in the SSNH part of the world, it's not that way. There are some fellowships and grant funding and things like that. But most of the top scholars in SSRN make anywhere from 2 to 10 times their faculty salary consulting, expert witnessing, and providing additional services around that. So traditionally, in the SSNH world, reputation mattered on a broader scale than it did in the STM world. So, more about sharing. Now we're seeing with bioRxiv and a number of other places, PLOS is doing it too, more about sharing earlier stage research. So the world is starting to evolve. But when we look at the world, our number one customer, almost identical to Louise and PLOS, is the researcher. And the researcher in our world has been traditionally worried about their reputation. How do they build up their reputation? Is it metrics? Is it prestige for publication? Whatever case may be, we look at their reputation. We then help them try to fill their desires. And unfortunately, to some extent, after 20 years, those desires have become demands. So they're constantly asking us for more information and more stuff, and we're continually challenged to try to provide that. So when I step back and I say, well, what is it about this idea? What is it about this kind of knowledge, this knowledge of innovation? I'm reminded of Robert Friedel's book, Culture of Improvement. And the book is a great book on top of a whole bunch of levels, but he talks about this really simple concept called time. And he says that the most important mechanical innovation in the Middle Ages was the invention of time. The ability for us to say, we're going to meet at 1 o'clock. And I would argue that batteries are probably the most beneficial innovation in our lifetime. But if you think about the ability of us just to be able to come together at a certain point in time and know that somebody else is going to be there because we all share that same clock. It's a really interesting concept of how that helped improve innovation. And he goes into a much more complex description of why that worked better in the West than in the East and a whole bunch of other aspects of it. But I took away from the book this concept of sharing. And throughout the book, he talks about innovation, he talks about sharing. And so I think about open access and I think about sustainability and all those other kinds of things, but I really think about it from a sharing perspective. How do we make more stuff available to other people so that other people can create cool, new, innovative things faster? So when I say what motivates me and what gets me excited, it's this idea that we can actually sharpen the saw and shorten the research life cycle, that we can get more research out faster by thinking about the ways that we can share better. Now, my last slide is actually one of my favorite pictures, and it's by Robert Mapplethorpe. And any of you that know Mapplethorpe's work, this may be the only picture I could share in a public setting. But it's Mapplethorpe's orchid. And it took me a while when I first looked at it, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And it took me a while to actually realize that the shadow was the devil. And so what I want to leave you with is this idea that actually there's a lot of things that appear to us in a certain way, but maybe, just maybe, they aren't as scary once we get to know them a little bit better. Thank you very much.